Orbital station Kepler 7 floated in the neutral zone between three competing stellar empires, a monument to bureaucratic compromise and the shared delusion that different species could coexist without regularly contemplating mutual annihilation. The station housed approximately 14,000 sentient beings. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. 47 distinct species, all of whom had signed treaties promising not to eat, assimilate, or otherwise inconvenience one another. That these treaties required 700 pages of addendums regarding what constituted eating said everything about galactic politics that needed saying. The station operated on what optimists called multi-species cooperation, and what everyone else called controlled chaos with airlocks. Gravity varied by section, atmosphere composition shifted every 50 meters, and the cafeteria had stopped trying to serve food that didn't offend at least 6 species' religious convictions. Security protocols were maintained by a joint force representing the major powers, which meant that half the guards couldn't legally enter the same room as the other half without a mediator present. Into this diplomatic powder keg, humanity had been admitted 3 years prior. The vote had been narrow. 17 species voted in favor, citing humans' apparent adaptability and surprising technological progress. 19 voted against, citing literally everything else about humans. The deciding vote came from the Sethian collective, whose representative had reportedly said, "Let them in. I want to watch what happens." What happened mostly was that humans kept doing human things, which consisted largely of ignoring rules they found inconvenient, befriending species that had sworn blood feuds against one another, and expressing disturbingly strong emotional attachments to things that were objectively trying to kill them. Security Officer Chen demonstrated all of these qualities in abundance, which was why Commander Vraxthal spent approximately 40% of his duty shifts contemplating her transfer to literally anywhere else in the galaxy, preferably somewhere without atmosphere. The Vraxian commander stood 7 feet tall in his ceremonial armor, which he wore despite regulations suggesting it was unnecessary for routine patrol debriefings. His species had evolved from pack hunters on a world where everything grew scales and tempers in equal measure. They'd clawed their way to space travel through sheer bloody-mindedness and a cultural philosophy that translated roughly to might makes right, and we have the most might, so shut up. Vraxthal had not achieved his rank through patience, compassion, or any other quality humans inexplicably seemed to value. He'd achieved it by being exceptionally good at following orders and ensuring others did the same, which was why the current situation was causing his secondary heart to palpitate in what the medical officer had called stress-induced arrhythmia, and what Vraxthal called justified homicidal ideation. The human stood in the corridor outside the restricted xenobiology research sector, arms crossed, boots planted, exhibiting what her species called that look. Vraxthal had learned to recognize that look. It preceded roughly 90% of the incident reports that crossed his desk. "Officer Chen," he said, his translator rendering his growl into flat, emotionless, galactic standard. "You were ordered to investigate unauthorized biosigns in Sector 12, identify the source, and report back." These were simple instructions. A hatchling could follow these instructions. "Please explain to me why you are still standing here 20 minutes after your scheduled return." The human didn't move. "Found the source, Commander." "Excellent. And?" "Can't report back yet." Vraxthal's jaw plates ground together, producing a sound like tectonic plates negotiating a divorce. "Officer Chen, you will report, now." "Negative, sir." Behind the human, visible through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, 2 small shapes moved in the shadows. Vraxthal's enhanced vision picked up details his officer clearly hoped he wouldn't notice. 4 legs each, approximately 15 pounds of mass, covered in dense fur that shifted colors between gray and silver, eyes that reflected light like polished mirrors. Cathara cubs. Of all the catastrophically stupid things Vraxthal had witnessed in his 30-year military career, and the list was extensive enough to require its own database, this somehow managed to crack the top 5. Those, he said, his voice dropping into registers that made the deck plates vibrate, are Cathara juveniles, Class 7 protected species, possession of which, without proper authorization and containment protocols, carries a minimum sentence of 15 cycles in a penal colony. The maximum sentence involves creative uses of airlocks that I am currently finding very appealing. They were alone, sir, scared, starving. Someone dumped them in the waste recycling access. They would have been dead in an hour. That is unfortunate. It is also not your concern, your responsibility, or your decision to make. You will step away from that door, allow the xenobiology team to handle the situation appropriately, and return to your quarters immediately. The human's expression didn't change. No, sir. Several things happened in Vraxthal's brain simultaneously, none of them conducive to rational thought. His species' instincts, honed through millennia of maintaining pack hierarchy through physical dominance, screamed at him to remove this insubordinate subordinate from his sight through the most direct method available. His training, drilled into him through decades of military discipline, demanded he follow protocol and call for backup to physically remove her if necessary. His experience working with humans for the past 8 months whispered that both options would somehow make the situation exponentially worse. That was not a request, officer. That was a direct order from your commanding officer. You will comply, or you will be charged with insubordination, unauthorized contact with protected species, and whatever else I can think of while I'm writing the report. And I'm feeling creative. The human met his gaze without flinching. Humans did that. Most species had the survival instinct to avoid eye contact with apex predators. Humans looked you dead in the eye and smiled while doing it. Sir, with respect, I'll accept whatever charges you want to file, after I make sure these cubs are safe, fed, and returned to their family group. In that order. Their family group is likely dead, officer. Cathara don't abandon young. If these cubs were left here, their pack was probably killed by poachers. The cubs are orphans. They'll be handed over to the Xenobiological Preservation Committee, who will place them in an appropriate facility, assuming one has room, which it probably doesn't, in which case they'll be euthanized according to committee protocols. That's how this works. That's how this has to work. We don't have the resources, the expertise, or the legal authority to do anything else. Then the system's broken, sir. The system is the system. We don't fix it. We follow it. You're a security officer, not a wildlife rehabilitation specialist. Stand down. After I get them safe, sir. Vraxthal's translator crackled with the volume of his roar. You are risking your career, your freedom, and your continued presence on this station for 2 animals that wouldn't hesitate to tear your throat out once they're grown. Cathara are apex predators. They're not pets, they're not companions, they're not your responsibility. They're babies, sir. Look at them. Vraxthal looked, against his better judgment, against every instinct screaming at him not to engage with human emotional logic. He looked. The cubs had emerged from the shadows, drawn perhaps by the noise or by some instinct he didn't understand. They were small, pathetically so, with oversized paws and ears that seemed comically disproportionate to their skulls. One of them made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a whimper. The other sat down and began grooming its sibling with single-minded intensity that suggested it was trying very hard to pretend the large, angry beings outside weren't there. They were, objectively speaking, young members of a dangerous species that would grow into 600-pound ambush predators capable of killing a fully armored soldier. They were also, objectively speaking, small and helpless and alone. Vraxthal felt nothing regarding this observation. His species had evolved past such useless sentiment millennia ago. They were practical, efficient, logical. The human, on the other hand, was doing that thing humans did. Her expression had softened in a way that suggested she was approximately 30 seconds from attempting something catastrophically stupid, even by human standards. "Officer Chen, step away from the door. Last warning." The human's hand moved to the door control. "Going to have to decline that order, Commander." "Sir." She opened the door and stepped inside before Vraxthal could override the lock. Vraxthal's roar could be heard 3 decks away, which was impressive considering the station's sound dampening systems were designed to prevent exactly that kind of cross-species auditory assault. Several Quilari diplomats reportedly fled their meditation chambers in terror. A Rothian engineer later filed a complaint that the vibrations had disrupted his calibration of the quantum flux regulators, though since nobody actually understood what quantum flux regulators did, the complaint was filed under general grievances and ignored. The human, naturally, ignored it entirely. She dropped to one knee inside the containment area, moving with the kind of slow, deliberate care that prey animals used around predators, and that predators never used around anything. The cubs watched her with eyes that reflected the emergency lighting in shades of amber and gold. They didn't run. They didn't attack. They did that thing young mammals did when confronted with something large and unknown. They froze and hoped camouflage would retroactively appear. "Officer Chen, you have 5 seconds to exit that room before I have you forcibly removed and sedated for your own protection." The human made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. One of the cubs' ears twitched. "They're scared, Commander. Look how they're shaking. When's the last time they ate? When's the last time anyone even touched them without trying to shove them in a cage? They are not your concern. You are creating a diplomatic incident, a safety hazard, and a mountain of paperwork that I will personally ensure falls on your head like orbital bombardment. Exit. Now." "Can't do that, sir." Vraxthal slammed his fist into the wall panel hard enough to crack the polymer casing. The emergency override for the containment door was 3 feet away. He could trigger it remotely, flood the room with sedative gas, and have his problem human unconscious in 40 seconds. Protocol demanded it. Regulation required it. Common sense screamed for it. He didn't do it. Not because he'd grown soft, he told himself. Not because 3 years of working alongside humans had infected him with their bizarre emotional reasoning. Certainly not because some tiny, buried part of his brain was curious about what exactly the human thought she was accomplishing. He didn't do it because sedative gas designed for Vraxian biology tended to make humans hallucinate, vomit, and occasionally develop temporary psychosis, and the last thing this situation needed was a violently ill, possibly psychotic human trapped in a room with endangered predator cubs. "Back up security to Sector 12, he growled into his comm. "Containment breach in progress. Non-lethal response only. And somebody get me, Dr. Yix from Xenobiology, now." The response came within seconds, because the universe had decided today was apparently everyone's problem. Lieutenant Corvin arrived first, his Mantarian exoskeleton clattering against the deck plates with each step. He took one look at the situation, then looked at Vraxthal with an expression that roughly translated to, "You cannot possibly pay me enough for this." "The human?" Corvin asked, his translated voice carrying the perpetual exhaustion of someone who'd learned humans were a special kind of chaos. "The human," Vraxthal confirmed. "What's she doing now?" "Committing career suicide. Possibly regular suicide. The situation's still developing." Inside the containment area, the human had produced something from her utility belt. A ration bar, standard emergency supply, designed to provide adequate nutrition for carbon-based life forms, while tasting like disappointment mixed with regret. She'd broken it into smaller pieces and placed them on the floor between herself and the cubs. One cub crept forward, then the other. Within moments, They were devouring the ration bar with the desperate intensity of creatures who'd forgotten what eating felt like. The human smile could have powered a small solar collector. "Oh, ancestors preserve us," Corvin muttered. "She's bonding with them." "She doesn't get to bond with them. They're not bonding animals. They're solitary apex predators that tolerate pack structure until reaching maturity, at which point they try to murder anything that looks at them wrong, including each other." "Does she know that?" "I told her, multiple times, using small words. And she's still in there? She's human, Corvin. They once kept creatures called tigers as illegal pets. Tigers. 600 pounds of murder wrapped in fur. Humans looked at them and thought, excellent household companion." Corvin's antennae drooped. "Why did we let them into the Accord again? Because someone thought they'd be useful." Vraxthal's voice carried the weight of profound regret. Someone was an idiot. Engineer Thex arrived next, her Quillari frame moving with the liquid grace of a species that had evolved in low gravity. She took in the scene with large, dark eyes that had seen too many human incidents to be surprised by anything anymore. "Let me guess. Human. Human. What's the charge this time? Theft of endangered species? Insubordination? Unauthorized access to restricted areas? And whatever else I can invent before the paperwork deadline, I'm considering adding assault on commanding officer's sanity. That's not a real charge. It should be. I'm writing a proposal." Dr. Yix arrived in a hover chair that compensated for his species' unfortunate relationship with standard gravity, his gelatinous body rippling with what might have been curiosity, or might have been indigestion. His people had never bothered to develop distinguishing expressions, finding the concept of physical communication inefficient compared to their preferred method of chemical signals. This made them excellent scientists and terrible poker players. "Commander Vraxthal, you summoned me with language that suggested imminent station-wide catastrophe. I see instead a human engaging in species-typical behavior patterns. What precisely requires my expertise? She's in there with Cathara cubs, unsecured, unsupervised, unsedated. The cubs or the human? Both." Dr. Yix's hover chair drifted closer to the viewing panel. His membrane pulsed with colors that his translator rendered as thoughtful consideration mixed with academic fascination. "Remarkable. The cubs are accepting food from her. Cathara juveniles typically reject offerings from unknown sources as potential poison. Their survival instinct should trigger flight response at her proximity. Should being the operative word. Nothing about humans works the way it should." Inside the containment area, the human had shifted position. She'd moved from kneeling to sitting cross-legged on the floor, her posture open and unthreatening. The cubs, having demolished the ration bar, were now investigating her with the careful attention of creatures deciding whether something was food, threat, or furniture. One of them sniffed her boot. The other climbed directly into her lap. Vraxthal felt something in his brain break. It made a small sound, like hope dying. No. No, no, no. That's not happening. That cannot be happening. "It appears to be happening, Commander," Dr. Yix observed, his tone carrying the detached interest of someone watching a particularly unusual chemical reaction. "The cub is exhibiting comfort-seeking behavior typically reserved for pack mates or maternal figures. Fascinating. I was unaware Cathara cubs could imprint on alien species." "They can't," Corvin said. "Current evidence suggests otherwise." "They shouldn't. And yet." The second cub had joined its sibling in the human's lap. She'd wrapped her arms loosely around both of them, making soft sounds that her species apparently believed constituted interspecies communication. The cubs were purring. Vraxthal didn't know Cathara could purr. His education had clearly failed him on multiple fronts. "Commander," the human called out, her voice carrying through the speaker system. "I need water for them. Clean water. And actual food, not ration bars. Something with protein. And blankets. They're cold. You need to exit the containment area and submit to arrest. After they're taken care of, sir. That wasn't a negotiation, Officer Chen. Wasn't asking permission, Commander. Just letting you know what's required. Vraxthal turned to Dr. Yix with the expression of someone whose day had exceeded maximum capacity for nonsense approximately 4 hours ago. Doctor, medical opinion. Can I stun her without harming the cubs? Inadvisable. Cathara cubs at this developmental stage respond poorly to stress. Witnessing violence against a newly imprinted caregiver could trigger permanent psychological damage. So you're saying she's taken them hostage? I'm saying she's created a situation where your options are limited to patience or catastrophe. Choose wisely. I choose violence. That falls under catastrophe, Commander. Fine. Then I choose the option where she spends the next decade in a penal facility contemplating her choices. Dr. Yix's membrane rippled in what might have been amusement. You're assuming she survives the next 10 minutes. Cathara cubs or no, she's in violation of 17 safety protocols. The Council's going to demand explanation. Multiple species will demand her removal. The Preservation Committee will demand prosecution. And you'll need to explain why you allowed this situation to develop to such extent. Vraxthal's claws extended involuntarily. Allowed? I didn't allow anything. She just did it. That's what humans do. They just do things without consideration for consequences, protocol, or basic survival instinct. It's like watching someone juggle plasma grenades while riding a gravitational anomaly. You can't look away because you need to witness exactly how the disaster unfolds. Perhaps, Dr. Yix mused, that's why they're successful. Successful? She's about to be court-martialed. She's also successfully caring for 2 cubs that would have died otherwise. From a certain perspective, that's achievement. From a certain perspective, jumping out an airlock is freedom. Doesn't make it smart. The human had started humming. Some melody from her homeworld, probably. Tuneless and strange to Vraxian auditory processing. The cubs had stopped shaking. Their breathing had slowed into something approaching rest. One of them yawned, displaying rows of teeth that would eventually grow into weapons capable of shearing through battle armor. The human looked directly at Vraxthal through the transparent aluminum. Her expression carried no defiance, no anger, no fear. Just certainty. The kind of certainty that suggested she'd made her choice and would die defending it if necessary. Which, knowing humans, she probably would. Commander, she said quietly, I'm taking them to my quarters. You can arrest me there, but I'm not leaving them alone. Not happening. Vraxthal's translator crackled with his response. The words that came out were, by galactic standard conventions, relatively polite. The subharmonics that his species used to convey real meaning suggested things about the human's parentage, intelligence, and future that would have required 17 lawyers and a xenolinguist to properly prosecute. The human smiled. I'll take that as permission, sir. See you in an hour. She stood, carefully, cubs cradled against her chest. They'd fallen asleep. 2 endangered predators, orphaned and alone, now sleeping peacefully in the arms of a creature they should by all rights have viewed as threat or prey. The human walked toward the door. The alarm started before the human made it 15 feet down the corridor. Not the standard security alert, which crew members had learned to tune out with practiced efficiency. This was the biological hazard klaxon, the one that meant something with teeth was loose and actively interested in redecorating the station with crew member components. The human stopped walking. The cubs stirred against her chest, making small, distressed sounds that would have been adorable if they weren't coming from creatures whose species had a documented history of disemboweling anything that annoyed them. Vraxthal's hand went to his sidearm. Don't move. Wasn't planning on it, sir. The corridor's atmospheric sensors flickered, temperature dropping. Something large was manipulating the environmental controls, which meant something large had accessed the station's systems. Then Vraxthal smelled it, musk and metal, and something organic that triggered every predator-prey instinct his species had spent millennia pretending they'd evolved past. The adult Cathara came around the corner with the fluid grace of a nightmare given physical form. 8 feet at the shoulder, 1,200 pounds of muscle, fur, and deeply held maternal opinions about where her offspring had disappeared to. Her eyes locked onto the human, then dropped to the cubs sleeping against her chest. The mother's growl started somewhere in the subsonic range and climbed into frequencies that made the deck plates harmonize in sympathy. "Commander," the human said, her voice remarkably steady, "I'm going to need you not to shoot. Step away from the animal." "Can't do that, sir. If I move wrong, she'll think I'm threatening them." The Cathara took a step forward. Her claws left grooves in the deck plating that would require complete panel replacement and several strongly worded memos to maintenance. Corvin had drawn his weapon. Dr. Yix's hover chair had retreated to what he presumably considered a safe distance, which was significantly farther away than everyone else. The human did something that would later be described in incident reports as inadvisable, and in human terms as the only reasonable option. She knelt down, slowly, cubs still cradled against her. She made that same soft clicking sound. The mother Cathara stopped. Her ears swiveled forward. "Hey there," the human said quietly. "Looking for these two? They're okay. I've got them. Nobody hurt them." The mother took another step, close enough now that Vraxthal could count individual teeth. The human extended her arm slightly, offering the cubs, "Here, take them. They need you." For approximately 5 seconds, nothing in the universe moved. Vraxthal's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger, knowing that if the mother attacked, he'd have perhaps one shot before the human became a cautionary tale. The mother Cathara leaned down. Her massive head moved close enough to the human that her breath displaced the officer's hair. One bite. That's all it would take. The mother's tongue, rough and broad, licked across the cubs' heads. Then, inexplicably, across the human's face. The cubs woke, chirping with excitement. The mother rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the deck. She carefully, impossibly gently, took one cub by the scruff of its neck, then the other. The human stood, slowly, face damp with Cathara saliva. The mother turned and walked away, cubs dangling from her jaws, tail swaying with satisfaction. Silence filled the corridor. "So," the human said eventually, wiping her face, "I'm guessing I'm still under arrest?" Vraxthal's translator couldn't adequately process his response. It came out as static, mixed with what sounded like distant screaming. "I'll take that as a yes, sir." The disciplinary hearing convened 6 hours later in Conference Room 7, which was designed to accommodate multiple species and their varying atmospheric requirements, gravitational preferences, and deeply held convictions about appropriate seating arrangements. The result was a space that satisfied nobody and annoyed everyone equally, which the Galactic Accord considered the pinnacle of diplomatic achievement. Vraxthal sat at the commander's position, his posture radiating the kind of rigid military bearing that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else. Across from him, the human stood at attention, her uniform still carrying faint traces of Cathara saliva that the decontamination team had deemed acceptable within safety parameters, and everyone else had deemed absolutely revolting. The tribunal consisted of representatives from 5 species, each of whom had strong opinions about humans and absolutely no hesitation about sharing them. Ambassador Quelix of the Mantarian Confederacy spoke first, his translated voice carrying the perpetual irritation of someone who'd spent 3 decades in bureaucratic service. "Officer, you violated direct orders, endangered yourself and others, and created a diplomatic incident involving a Class 7 protected species. Your defense?" The human met his gaze without flinching. "I found 2 starving cubs in a waste disposal area. I kept them alive. I reunited them with their mother, sir. That's not a defense. That's a confession. It's what happened. Dr. Yicks's membrane pulsed with colors that suggested scientific curiosity, winning a vicious battle against common sense. From xenobiological perspective, her actions were successful. The cubs survived. The mother retrieved them without casualties. By measurable outcomes, this represents positive result. By measurable outcomes, Counselor Thress of the Quillari delegation interjected, her voice like wind through crystal caves. She's lucky to be alive. Cathara matriarchs have killed entire security teams for less perceived threat to offspring. But she didn't, the human said quietly. The mother knew I wasn't a threat. She knew I'd protected them. You assume, Vraxthal said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd aged approximately 17 years in the past 6 hours. You projected human emotional reasoning onto an alien predator and gambled your life on the assumption it would respond the way you wanted. I didn't assume anything, Commander. I watched. I listened. She was looking for her cubs, not looking to kill anyone. I gave her what she wanted. Ambassador Quellix's antennae twitched with agitation. This tribunal isn't here to debate your reasoning, officer. We're here to determine consequences. You broke regulations. Protocol exists for reasons. If every officer decided which orders to follow based on personal feelings, we'd have chaos. With respect, sir, we had chaos. 2 cubs were dying. Someone had to do something. Someone did. You. Without authorization, without backup, without consideration for anyone else's safety, including your own. The human's expression didn't change. Yes, sir. Silence settled over the conference room like dust after an explosion. The tribunal members exchanged glances, consulted their data pads, and engaged in the kind of whispered deliberations that suggested nobody actually knew what to do with a human who kept accidentally succeeding through methods that should have gotten her killed. Finally, Counselor Thress spoke. The tribunal has reached decision. Officer, you're hereby reprimanded for insubordination and violation of safety protocols. You'll serve 30 days additional duty in xenobiology section under Dr. Yicks's supervision, learning proper procedures for endangered species encounters. Dismissed. The human blinked. That's it? Would you prefer harsher sentence? No, ma'am. Just surprised. Don't be. Half this council wanted you imprisoned. The other half wanted you studied. We compromised on making you someone else's problem. Thress's expression might have been a smile. Also, the mother Cathara is still on station. She's nested in Environmental Control Section 9 with her cubs. Nobody's been able to remove her without risking casualties. Since you're apparently the only being she tolerates, congratulations. You're now responsible for convincing her to leave. The human's face did something complicated. You're kidding. I never kid, officer. Humans wanted to join the Accord. This is what membership looks like. Dismissed. The human saluted and left, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Vraxthal slumped in his chair, the rigid military bearing finally cracking. I hate this job. I hate this station. I especially hate humans. Dr. Yicks's membrane rippled with what might have been amusement. And yet they get results, Commander. Strange, inadvisable, occasionally traumatizing results. But results nonetheless. That's not comforting, Doctor. It wasn't meant to be. Welcome to the future of galactic cooperation. It's going to be very, very interesting. Outside, alarms started again. Someone was singing to a Cathara matriarch. Badly. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It just wasn't funny to anyone actually living through it.